So this webinar is being recorded and it will be posted on the Small Acreage Management website probably by tomorrow. So thanks for joining us today. Our presentation today is residential rainwater harvesting in Colorado. And I'm happy to have here with me Jennifer Tucker, the Small Acreage Management Agent in Adams County, and Deryn Davidson, the CSU Horticulture Agent in Boulder County. So this presentation today is a cooperative effort between the Colorado Master Gardener Program and the Colorado Small Acreage Program, both CSU extension programs. If you're new to webinars today, just take a look at the bottom left-hand corner of your screen is the chat box, and here's where you can type in your questions as the speakers talk. If you have any questions, feel free to write in your comments or your questions, and they'll try to address them if they can right away. Otherwise, we'll have some Q&A time at the end of both presentations. So Jennifer and Deryn are both going to speak, and we're only scheduled initially for an hour, but this might end up going maybe an hour and 10 minutes or so. So if you can't stay with us the whole time, just remember it will be recorded and you can catch up with what you miss if you need to log off. So with that, we'll just go ahead and I'll turn it over to Jennifer Tucker to get started.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jennifer Tucker, and I'm going to be presenting some information to you all on the history of water law and just kind of get you up to speed a little bit about why things are the way they are and how we got to where we are. So a little bit about the webinar outline. We're going to talk a little bit about the history of why is it just now legal, and the rain barrels, and then how we can use those rain barrels to affect our earthworks. And we're going to be integrating both of those aspects into your landscape. So here in Colorado, we have a very different water law as compared to eastern parts of the United States. And while many people look at us like we're the Wild West, we are mostly farmers and ranchers that we're dealing with a very limited resource, even over, if we look at our history of a long time ago. And while the quote has been credited to a lot of people, including Tom Sawyer and Mark Twain, excuse me, whiskey is for drinking and water for fighting. We don't really know where that quote comes from, but it is kind of something that makes a lot of Coloradans smile as it relates to our water law. So we have to recognize that Colorado, we do not use riparian laws here in Colorado in relation to our water. We have the doctrine of prior appropriation, and what that means is first in time, first in right. And when we really look back on how that affects Colorado water law, basically whoever was here first and put in for those water rights first, they have first use of that water. So we have beneficial use, and you have to be able to prove that the water is being put to good use. And we do also have aspects of use it or lose it. So something that's kind of unique to Colorado is the water is not necessarily tied to the piece of property. So you might have a creek rolling through your property or a pond, but you may not have access to that water. And that's where things get a little bit confusing, especially to folks that are new to Colorado water law. So something to think about is we get a lot of pushback that all the water that is on my property I should have use of. That's not actually realistic, because when we start thinking about if we have flooding, do you really want all that water on your property, and do you want to have to contain it and use it on your own property? And as we start looking into the history of Colorado water law, we have agreements with other states that we are legally obligated to provide water to. And especially when we start looking at the western part of the United States, if we don't provide that water, there are financial obligations to the state. So our water law is administered through the state in our water courts, and it is a very technical process that you wouldn't just want to walk into a water court without significant background and the help of resources of those who are highly educated in that. But our adherence to those interstate compacts, and we'll talk about that here in a few minutes about how we are in some of those agreements. Again, those are legally obligations that we have here in Colorado that are were made a long time ago, and they are upheld through our first-in-time prior appropriation method of water appropriation. So I touched on this a little bit of who owns the water in Colorado, and why can't you just keep all the water that flows onto your own property? Again, if we look at 2013, the September 2013 floods that we had here in Colorado, very few people would want to keep all that water that fell onto their property. And so we have methods of that water making it into water flows that flow out of Colorado. There are also states that are absolutely reliant upon us. When you realize we are a headwater state, and with the exception of a very small part of the northwest corner of Colorado, no water really flows into our state. So all the water we have is what falls mostly from snow, but also from rain. And then through our topography, flows down to different parts of the state and then out of the state. And if we don't provide that water to other states, we've seen both to the west and most recently to the east, Kansas and Nebraska, that if we don't provide enough water, an agreed upon amount of water, then we have to go back and we have to provide financial obligations to those states. And we see then in Colorado, agricultural wells are often some of the very first to turn off. We've all been through water restrictions, and while that can be a pretty big hassle in an urban landscape, when we start looking at the agricultural ramifications of, let's say, an alfalfa crop, if a pivot, so the well is turned off, meaning the farmer can't water that field, he's not only losing a cutting or two of that alfalfa, he may well lose the entire alfalfa crop, have to reseed it, and that's a multi-year process. So it can be a pretty big and devastating issue when a well does get turned off. So brief history is State Bill 09-080, and that was the first one that came around, and that really became active in 2010. It went through in 09, but we started seeing people who had a domestic well that they were allowed to use 100 gallons annually from rainwater. Well, that wasn't much, and that rainwater could only be diverted from a home, so you couldn't pull it off of a shop, and you had to have a permit. You had to go through the state water board and actually get a permit. And that only was applicable to those that were on a well. So everybody that was on city water wasn't an option. So it was an advantage to rural Coloradans, but didn't have a big impact. Also, House Bill 09-1129, that allowed special permits for subdivision developers. This was really a very small impact, and this water law was very small scale, where we were only able to service those that had approached it. Jane, we'll see what we can do to fix the echo. So as we look in Colorado water law, CSU conducted a study, and we found that there'd be no adverse effect on senior or junior water rights users of downstream users by the utilization of rain barrels. And that kind of put into play our current water law that allows homeowners to have 2 rain barrels. And we're going to go into that here shortly. We also know that the amount of water that we are collecting coming off the rain barrel is pretty small in comparison to when we look at that rainwater runoff as a whole. So now in 2016, we can have our 2 rain barrels, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Sheila and Trenna will talk a little bit about junior and cedar water rights offline if you'd like, but it basically goes back to that first in time, first in right. So who got there first and who has the oldest water rights? We could spend a week on water law explaining in-depth Colorado water law. So we'll talk a little bit about what a rain barrel is legally, but probably a very important aspect of Colorado water law is that your rain barrel has to have a sealable lid. It has to be located above ground. Other states, very popular to have underground water storage, but here in Colorado, it says we have to have that above ground, and it has to be from a downspout or from a rooftop. And so that's really kind of the essential definition of a rain barrel. And so with House Bill 16-1005, you're allowed up to 2 rain barrels with a combined storage of 110 gallons. Now what that means is you can have 2 rain barrels, and you can have those in continuous use. So we can now exceed that 100-gallon limitation that was in the previous laws. So you can use a lot more water, but you can only have 2 rain barrels total. They can be in tandem and attached, or they can be coming off of 2 separate downspouts. So do keep that in mind. And so what you're seeing here in the photo, that is not a legal option. That was a chained rain barrel system. We cannot use that here in Colorado. It's against the law. So legally, it has to be from a single family home or a multi-family unit with less than 4 or less units. And it has to be collected from the roof. And again, it is still limited to that 2 rain barrels, even on that 4 unit. No apartment complexes and no multi-family units. Again, more than 4 units. So definition of a single family residence, it's a private residence that's a separate building or an individual residence that's part of a row. And that single shared wall is going to be a pretty important defining factor. So apartments and condos, again, you got to have less than 4 units or less. And recognize it's 110 gallons per building, not per apartment. The water has to be used on the same property, and that's really a big deal because I have folks that they may have a property that they're using it in flower beds. That's not okay. It has to be used, and it has to be used outside. I don't know if you guys can see the rest of that. And that's really an important factor, is it has to be, this isn't for use for watering your house plants, and we'll talk a little bit about what it is also not to be used for, but it's to be used to water plants outside is your best use of this water. And this is something that I get approached as a small acreage agent quite a bit, is my HOA. Your HOA can't prevent you having a rain barrel. However, please be advised that they can put very definite restrictions on where the rain barrel is placed or how it's concealed. They may have requirements that it's painted a neutral color or painted a similar color than the house, may require screening. So you will need to check with your HOA to see if there is any requirements on that. And we expect that to be something that's in flex as we go. I'm going to turn over to Deryn now. She's going to talk with you a little bit about gray water harvesting and stormwater harvesting.
Okay, hi everyone, this is Deryn Davidson. I'm the Boulder County Horticulture Extension Agent. And I'm going to just sort of take part 2 of this presentation. So gray water harvesting is very different than rain barrel water harvesting. Stormwater harvesting is also different. I've gotten questions, can I put gray water into my rain barrels? The answer is absolutely not. These are very separate systems. If you're interested in gray water harvesting, and that is collecting your shower water or your washing machine water, that is legal, but that's a whole separate topic, and you can find a lot of information. We have some fact sheets that are going to be coming out soon on that, but that is a separate thing from rain barrels. And then stormwater harvesting, we're going to talk a little bit about passive harvesting and how you integrate the rain barrels into your landscape. But again, stormwater harvesting is considered the runoff once it's hit the ground. And to legally use rain barrels, it's captured water from your roof or your downspout. So you can see that the collected precipitation is used for outdoor purposes, like Jennifer was saying, and primarily it's really to irrigate lawns and gardens. So you just sort of want to keep it simple. People come up with all different scenarios of can I do this, can I do that, but just keep in mind this is really to be used on your outdoor landscape. You cannot wash dishes with it. You definitely don't want to drink it. You can't use the water to do your laundry. Like I was saying, you can come up with all kinds of different ideas, but you want to keep it on the landscape. And all this information that Jennifer covered and then that I just briefly covered is regulated by the state engineer. And there's information, you can see the website at the bottom of the screen there, water.state.co.us. You can find a lot more information there about the rules and the regulations. So a lot of people ask, how big of an impact is this going to have if I'm collecting rainwater? So one of the benefits of rain barrel use is not a whole lot of water that you can collect, but one of the nice things is that you can capture the water to use later where you want it. And if you see the photo on the right, I'm going to grab the arrow real quick. So you see on the lake here, you see where that green arrow just popped up, that light band that goes all the way around that reservoir? That's often termed as the bathtub ring. What that's showing is the level of water and how much it's dropped. And so one of the things that we're doing here, if you're collecting rainwater to use on your landscape, you're trying to minimize the amount of municipal water that you're using on your landscape, and that's going to have a positive impact. We're not going to be drawing as much water from the reservoirs and water sources. And Carl, we're looking, I see your question there about using harvested stormwater for livestock watering. The answer is no. So it's really just intended to be used on outdoor lawns, plants, and gardens. Good question. So people also want to know how much money or how much water can I save? Well, all of that depends on your site. So it depends on how much precipitation you get, what the hydrology is of your landscape. If you're looking at, the water use of the different plants you have, if you have high water use plants, the water in your rain barrel is not going to go as far as if you have more xeric plants, and so on and so forth. So it really does depend. But just to give you an idea, if you have two rain barrels, two 55-gallon rain barrels for a total of 110 gallons, the approximation is that you would be able to adequately water, which means apply 1 inch of water to about 180 square feet. So that's a little bit smaller than 15 feet by 15 feet. So hopefully that kind of gives you a visual of how much. So while it is great to be able to use this rainwater, it's not 110 gallons at any one given time. Will water a certain area, but it's not like enough water to water a really huge landscape. But again, you can continue to fill your rain barrel every time it rains, and you can apply that 110 gallons multiple times. So some of the benefits of rainwater over your municipal water, well, it's free, generally speaking. It falls out of the sky and fills your rain barrel. Colorado rainwater is generally soft and it's low in salts, which is good for plants. It's not treated, so it's unchlorinated, and that's better for plant growth. And then studies also show that rainwater contains small amounts of nitrogen. So if you've noticed, just even after the past couple of days, we've gotten some moisture, we get sort of a greening effect after a rain event. That's because the plants are getting a little shot of nitrogen. So there are definitely a lot of things to keep in mind when you're talking about holding rainwater on your site, and safety is one of the big ones. So ideally, you're going to use your rainwater within about a week. Research shows that you can store the rainwater for up to a month, but really if you're going to hold it any longer than that, like you're going out of town or something, you should really drain that water. One of the reasons is that rain barrels, they're really only ecologically relevant if you use them. You don't want to just store the water indefinitely. And just to give you an example, you know, we've been allowed this rain barrel and rainwater harvesting, and we want to be good water stewards. So we know that the farmers and ranchers are also relying on this water. We don't want to have a negative impact. So with the example up on the screen, if a 1,000-unit subdivision were to install one rain barrel, so one 55-gallon rain barrel on every home, and if just 20% of those homeowners didn't use their rain barrels, so they kept the water in the barrels, that's 11,000 gallons that's not making it back into the water cycle. So that kind of illustrates you really do want to use that water. During the winter time, we have to deal with rain barrels differently than some of our, some states that have warmer climates where things don't freeze. They can use their rain barrels year round. But you can see the image on the right there. You don't want your rain barrel to look like that. That's a mess. So over the winter, you want to disconnect your rain barrel, dry it out, store it upside down, move it into the garage if you can, and you want to have the spigot open. Now, of course, we get snowstorms and then sunny days, and then, the snow melts, and that water could potentially be going into your rain barrel, but it's better to just take it out of commission over the winter months and then use it during the rain garden or during the growing season. And there's a question about diverting water into rain gardens. We're going to go into that quite a bit. We're going to talk about how you can integrate rain barrels into your landscape. So a few more safety concerns. Mosquitoes can certainly, many people know that they need hardly any water and hardly any time to complete their life cycle. And so if we have standing water, that's something we want to keep in mind. So one of the requirements of the House bill is that you have a sealable lid. And one of those reasons is that way you can have a fine mesh that mosquitoes potentially cannot get into to breed. But also what you can do is, again, if you're draining the rain barrel regularly, then if any mosquitoes did get in, they're not going to have a chance to complete the life cycle. And if any larvae are in there, you're draining them out. And you can also use mosquito dunks. You can see the image there on the right. So this is something that you can, a lot of people that have ponds and water features and that sort of thing will use mosquito dunks. And they contain BT or Bacillus thuringiensis. It's ingested by the larva and it kills the mosquitoes. So if you want to be extra cautious, then you can put those in your rain barrels. It doesn't have any adverse effect on the plants that you might put it on. So some more safety concerns is water quality. So as I was saying, generally Colorado rainwater is high quality, but one of the biggest problems we have is that because our rainstorms are sort of few and far between, our rooftops have a chance to get kind of gunky. So you can get bird poop, dirt, dust, that sort of thing. And those are going to build up and potentially, you know, wash down into your rain barrel. But there are some things in place to deal with that. And one of those is called a first flush. And really this depends on how you're going to use your water, but a first flush device is a really good idea. So you can see in the image there, again, I'm going to grab the arrow. The picture on the left here shows, if you imagine these are PVC pipes, your downspout goes into where the green arrow is here, and the water comes in. This chamber is empty, but that's where the first several gallons of water that's coming off your roof are going to go first. As this tube fills up, the ball rises, and this water down here is going to be the dirtier water, and then the water that's going to pass over that is generally going to be more clean, and that's what's going to make it into your rain barrel. Here's another one you can see. This is the downspout coming in. This is going to capture, generally first flush devices are 3 to 5 gallons, and they figured out that that's generally about enough water to capture most of the nasty water. That's going to fill up, and then the water is going to go back into the downspout and into your rain tank. So algae growth can happen, particularly if your tank is light in color or translucent. So an easy way to avoid that is to make sure you get a dark tank or a darker tank. If you're noticing, you want to check on your rain barrel pretty regularly. So it's not just a install it and forget it kind of thing. It does require some maintenance. And so you want to, check on your tank every, couple weeks, every month, something like that. Also depending on how much rain we're actually getting. But if you are noticing algae buildup, you can simply move it out from its location. If it's empty, of course, you want to drain it first because they're extremely heavy when they're full. And you can just do a dilute bleach solution where you rinse out the inside of the rain barrel, rinse it really well with fresh water when you're done, and then you can put it back in its place. You do want to be cautious of watering edible plants with water if you know that there's algae growing, because there are some algae that produce toxins that can be harmful. So you just want to kind of monitor things and make sure that the system is nice and clean. So overflow is something that people kind of tend to forget about. So, it's rare, but we do get those deluge rains, like Jennifer was saying, when we got the flood and that sort of thing. So you see on this example, you've got the downspout here. This barrel has filled to capacity. It doesn't take long to fill 55 gallons. And if this hose isn't open, or if your overflow, you can see right there, is too small, it's just going to come pouring out. So you want to really pay attention to where the overflow is going. You want to direct it away from the foundation of your home and direct it to somewhere where it can actually be used, so out into the landscape. So just as a reminder, this PowerPoint, this whole webinar will be recorded and it will be available online. So your barrel has to have an overflow. You want it about 2 or 3 inches from the top of the barrel, so that when it fills up, once it reaches the top, the overflow hose, as in this image here, allows the excess water to go where you want it. And you can see they just put it where the downspout might have been naturally, so it's going out into the yard. Your overflow can, obviously, like I was saying, can be directed into your landscape, and I'm going to go into more passive harvesting, but you can also use your overflow to connect 2 barrels. So if you decide to have your 2 55-gallon barrels right next to each other, the overflow can go from 1 barrel to your second barrel, and then you drain off that second barrel. If you set up this kind of system, the second barrel needs to be slightly lower than the first barrel, and that is because this is all a gravity-fed system. You've got to work with gravity. And so your catchment area, this is your roof, right? It's the first point of contact for the rain. It's where the rain hits. That is your catchment area. Typically asphalt shingles, are just fine. Some wood shingles can contain preservatives that might be harmful, so that's something that you have to sort of check out what you have, what your own situation is, and then move forward from there. And then metal roofs tend to shed contaminants, and the first flush can usually take care of that. So to figure out how much water you're going to get, if you're curious, just a quick calculation. If you look at the rectangle there, that's a bird's eye view of a sort of a ranch style house. You can see from eave to peak is 20 feet, and then the length of the roof is 40 feet. And then each of these brown dots is a downspout. So you could potentially have a rain barrel at the base of each downspout there. So the calculation that you do, you multiply 20 times 40, that means you have 800 square feet of catchment area. And then you figure out based on the amount of rain that you're getting. So if you see in this first equation, you have 800 square feet. If you get a ½ inch of rain, then you multiply it by 0.5. And then the coefficient you multiply that by is 0.6 or 0.63 to be more exact. So in just a ½ inch of rain, an 800 square roof is going to collect 252 gallons. So even if we only got a 1/10 of an inch of rain, and a lot of times in Colorado we get, tiny little rains, 1/10 of an inch of rain, you can potentially almost fill up one of your rain barrels. So over the course of a year, that can be thousands of gallons. So it really does work. I've talked to a lot of people that think, well, we hardly get any rain, and will they actually fill up? Well, they will. I've seen it, and they do. So again, storage, we've been talking a lot about safety and storage and all the right things to do. And this is just to make sure, because this is sort of a new practice for Colorado, we want to make sure that everybody knows the best management practices. And so I'm just going to cover a little bit more about that. So we have another question. The calculation is based on inches of rainfall for a given storm. That's correct. That's how you're going to know. So if you get a 1-inch rain, you do that calculation and you can figure out how many gallons you're going to get. So hopefully that answers that question. So you're storing the water in your barrel. You want to make sure that according to House Bill 16-1050 that it's secure and clean. You always want to use good safety practices when you're installing it, or if you're doing a DIY, that your gloves and safety glasses and all of that, if you're drilling and doing different things with power tools. You can definitely find some cheaper barrels from bakeries, delis, feed stores, that sort of thing. Or you can also use a large trash can as long as it has a sealable lid. But then there are also pre-manufactured barrels that you can get online. And some of the hardware stores are starting to carry them a little bit. So you just kind of have to poke around a little bit. But there are barrels that already exist that are 55 gallons that you can modify to be a rain barrel. So again, House Bill 16-1005 requires that you have a sealable lid. You can put that screen in, like we've been talking about for mosquito control. This example here has a lot of different holes cut in with screen mesh over it. So then you'd put the downspout just somewhere over there. And instead of having just one tiny little hole like this one, you're gonna, less water is potentially gonna splash out. But either way works. And then you want the downspout to be pretty close, 1 to 2 inches away from the lid of the barrel. You don't want there to be a large gap between the end of the downspout and the lid. So the bottom line here is this is what the barrel must have. You've got to have your overflow, because the barrels, in a heavy rain, the barrel will fill up, and so you do need to have that overflow that you can direct into your landscape. You have to have an inlet on the top where your downspout is going to be directed, and then you have to have an outlet, and that's where you're going to attach your hose and drain the water from, whether it's into a hose or a watering can or whatever. And you want to make sure that if you're making this yourself or you're buying a pre-made one, you want that spigot on the bottom to be 3 to 4 inches from the base. This allows enough access so that you can get your hand in there and get your hose attached, but it also allows sediment to settle so that you can just have clean water. So one thing to remember is that this is a gravity-fed system. In other states where they have larger tanks and cisterns, they might attach pumps and that sort of thing, but that's when you're talking thousands of gallons of storage. So if we just have 55 gallons of storage, really you just want to, the easiest thing is to attach a garden hose. You can put a drip system on. You don't want to have any emitters, so you would just have the spaghetti tubing open. But because this is a gravity-fed system, the pressure is going to be more when the tank is full, and as it starts to empty, you're going to have less and less pressure. So you can raise the barrel up onto a stand, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. And so choosing a site. This is important. You want to have your rain barrel as close as you can to where you're going to be using the water. You don't want to have to be dragging hoses, especially because there won't be a lot of pressure. And you want to make sure that it's a safe site and it's a nice and sturdy site. A full 55-gallon barrel can weigh around 400 pounds. So you want to make sure that it's secure and it's not going to tip over. So as I was saying, you're going to have better pressure if you elevate the tank. And so concrete blocks can be used to make an area sturdy and to be able to raise it up a little bit. And then, like I was saying, you want to make sure that you don't have to have a really long length of hose to be moving from your tank, because there isn't going to be a whole lot of pressure. This is just sort of a shopping list for when you're getting ready to install. I'm not going to go over every single one of these things, but just kind of glance over it. These are some of the tools and things that you'll need. I helped somebody install a rain barrel over the weekend, and it went pretty smoothly, but we did have to adjust the downspout. So we had to cut the downspout, get different elbows to, direct the water into the barrel, that sort of thing. And one of the nice things about being a little bit later to the sort of rain barrel party is that a lot of other states have been doing this for years. And so there's tons of really good information from those states. You can see on the lower right there, if you search Utah State University rain barrels, they have YouTube videos. The University of Arizona also has a lot of really good information. So people have been doing this for years and years. So while it's new to us, and we need to understand how it all works, a lot of this stuff has already been done, so we can learn from them. So as I was saying, the easiest is going to be a prefabricated barrel. So here are a couple of examples that you can get that are already put together. For the most part, you just have to put them on a sturdy stand and connect the downspout. You can also create them yourselves from barrels, and that takes a little bit more work, but also doable. Again, you want to look for a sealable lid, proper spigot or drain placement. Sometimes they'll have the spigot sort of at the middle of the barrel. And so if your spigot is 2 feet up from the bottom of the barrel, then that's 2 feet of water that you're not going to have access to. And then again, to comply with the rules and regulations, you want to make sure that your volume is not more than 110 gallons total. So then again, elevating the rain barrel, here are a few examples of what you can do. Again, the most important thing here is that it's sturdy and it's not going to tip, because if it tips over, it could do some damage. Again, the higher it is, though, the easier it is to connect the hose and the more pressure you'll have. So you kind of have to find that sweet spot. You don't want to go too high, but you do want to elevate a little bit. And then again, your downspout, you want to direct it as close to the inlet hole as possible. You want to have just about a 1 to 2 inch gap. Otherwise, there's potential for the water to splash out. There are downspout filtrations. One thing that sometimes people forget to think about is that their gutters can get clogged, and if their gutters get clogged, then the water's not going to make it down the downspout. And that happens all the time, whether somebody has a rain barrel or not. So you can get a few things like this. This is going to stop leaves and sticks from going down the downspout, but you need to clean out that gutter. This is something called a leaf eater. So you can see the downspout was cut, and the leaf eater goes in place in between the downspout, and then the barrel would be down here. That's going to catch any sticks or twigs or anything and stop it from getting clogged up at the mouth of the barrel. And then this is just another example of a diverter. And again, it's hard to find this stuff around here right now, but you can find most of it online. And I suspect as time goes on and more people start doing this, the supplies will become easier to find. So again, just a visual of a couple of different types of diverters that you might be looking for and you might see, because some of these parts and pieces might be kind of new to you. And this is what an installed one might look like. So you've got the upper downspout, a flexible downspout, there's always an overflow, there's the diverter or the first flush, of course the rain barrel, and then you have a lower outlet to access the water. Okay, so now moving on to integrating the rain barrel into your landscape. And I really think that a rain barrel alone is pretty ineffective. You've got to think about how you're going to actually use it in the landscape. So it's an integrated system that works together. We have a comment that there are a lot of manufacturers of roof gutter screens and guards that keep debris out of gutters. That is true, yes, there are. And that's some of what I was covering. There are definitely different options for that. So when we start talking about what we do with the rainwater, either from the rain barrel or just directly from our downspout, that's more passive rainwater harvesting. So rather than active, where we're capturing it to use later, passive rainwater harvesting is moving the water through your landscape to use it immediately. And then it's going directly back into the water cycle. So again, back to this picture on the left where you have this rain barrel absolutely overflowing and not going anywhere useful, that's the water that you want to direct into your landscape. The picture on the right simply shows the bottom of a downspout that we're all more familiar with. So when you're thinking about passive water harvesting and integrating it into your landscape, you want to think about slowing the water, spreading it out, and then sinking it. So rather than the water rushing off your lawn or your sidewalk or your driveway and into the street, where it then, picks up all kinds of pollutants, goes into our storm drains, and then makes it into lakes and rivers and that sort of thing, you're trying to get the water to infiltrate into the water system right on your site. And you can do that through gutters and downspouts, swales, berms, French drains, and bio-infiltration gardens. So that's what I'm going to zip through right now. So to figure out what kind of passive harvesting makes sense for you, you want to have sort of a flow map. So you need to know what your property, how it acts, how it behaves, where are the high spots, where are the low spots. So after the next rainstorm, you can sort of observe the water is coming down my downspout or off my roof, and it always puddles over here, or it rushes off from there. So you need to figure that out about your land and your landscape. You can create a really simple little map. This is an aerial view just sketched out. You've got in the middle there the footprint of the house and then some landscape features, and it's the blue arrows are just highlighting what direction the rainwater is running. So passive rainwater harvesting is something that's been around for a very, very long time. Ancient civilizations developed practices a long time ago, and basically it's just another word for this is earthworks. So you're moving soil around and you're just managing water where it flows. And the picture there is Native Americans doing what's called waffle gardening, which is an ancient gardening technique or farming technique. So the first thing I'm going to mention are swales. So swales are landscape or earthworks that spread water horizontally and generally on the contours of the land. So swales don't hold water, they help move water. So if you've heard of dry creek beds, as you can see in this image here, this is coming from a high spot over here, and then it's moving down this swale into a lower spot. Here's another dry creek. And you know, it just looks like a nice landscape feature. There's a little footbridge, but when there's water flowing, that can actually be conveying water to another part of the garden. Berms are next. They're also sometimes called microbasins. So these are created to slow water down. So you're not moving water with berms, you're actually trying to slow it down, let it infiltrate. And you can see the images here in the upper right and the lower right. These are designed, they're just raised areas of soil where the water can fill up one berm and then overflow and go into the next berm. So again, you're just slowing the water on the landscape. And this might be water that's coming from your rain barrel, or it might be water that's just coming from your downspout. If you do create berms, you want to make sure that the transition between the flat grade and the grade of the berm is sort of a natural, easy slope. You don't want it to be a hard angle. Two reasons. One is, with the top example here, as water comes and hits that angle, because if it's too sharp, it's going to start to erode and break down the berm. Whereas if it's more of a gentle slope, that's not going to happen. And then also, you don't necessarily want your front yard or your backyard to look like it has all these little road bumps everywhere. So if it has a more natural, gentle slope, then it's going to blend into the landscape better. You don't want that, but you want that. Next, we have French drains. So French drains spread and slow the water. These are often used if you're having water pooling issues near your foundation. There's a little more infrastructure involved. You have your downspout is connected to PVC pipe that goes to a gravel area, as you can see on those images. But you can also use it just as a landscaping feature to move water where you want it to go. Here's a cross section. You can see we've got the soil here. This is maybe turf. And this is a trench filled with gravel, and then your pipe here. And the way it works is once the pipe reaches the gravel area, the pipe is perforated, and it allows the water to seep out slowly. And so finally, we have bioinfiltration gardens. So these spread, slow, and sink. So these do all of the things that we're trying to accomplish with passive rainwater collection. And bioinfiltration garden is really just a fancy name for rain gardens. So these are becoming more and more popular. This big one here is a very large rain garden. And basically what they do is they're just a depressed area where stormwater can run into that. The plant choices can, depending on what plants you put in there, especially grasses, they have very fibrous roots. They can start to clean the water if it's polluted at all. And it's going to be better quality water that's infiltrating into the ground and back into the water cycle. So you can have huge ones like that. This is clearly in front of apartments or condos or something, but you can also have smaller ones just in front of your home that just look like a landscaped bed. And so they're modeled after natural ecosystems. Again, they keep water on site, and they can reduce heavy metals and nutrients and other bad stuff that stormwater can kind of pick up along the way. So to install them, you want to make sure that you're locating it in an area where your runoff naturally occurs anyway. So water follows the path of least resistance. It's always going to travel downhill. Even if you have a spot in your yard that you think it would look really beautiful, if it's higher than where the water flows, it'll never work. So you want to make sure that you're placing these in a lower spot in your yard. You definitely want to keep rain gardens at least 10 feet away from buildings, 35 feet away from septic tanks, and 50 feet away from water wells. And this is because you're directing a large amount of water into one spot, so you don't want to have a negative impact on anything. If your house doesn't have any gutters, then it's going to be a lot harder to capture rainwater. You might want to think about installing gutter, and that would be a part of your whole system. So you could sort of think of that as it's part of your active or passive rainwatering system. So you can kind of see in this illustration how the rainwater works. Up by the house, the gutters and downspouts drain over to this rain garden area. And native plants tend to be the ones that are best suited for rain gardens because they can handle periods of dry and then they can handle periods of wet. I have a question about rain chains. Rain chains are kind of more decorative than anything else. They do direct water down, but they really are more of a decorative thing. You could have your rain chain go to the top of a rain barrel though. So plant selection for all these different landscape features. All plants need water during establishment, even if it's considered xeric or native. But a lot of them, once they're established, can get by with less water. So Plant Select, that's a CSU and Denver Botanic Garden and some others. It's a program that they research and find plants that do well in our area, don't need a whole lot of water, so that's a good place to check out. But you definitely want to look for plants that are water-wise or considered xeric. So again, designing for rainwater harvesting, this includes your active water harvesting, which is the rain barrel, which we're now allowed to do, which is great. We just want to make sure that we're following the rules and regulations so that we don't abuse the privilege. And then you want to tie that into the passive water harvesting, and that's all of the features that I was just discussing, the berms and the swales, French drains and rain gardens. And it's best really when these all work together, when it's really an integrated system. And so if you see in this image here, this is passive harvesting, but we can imagine that our rain barrel is there. So the rainwater is going from our gutter and downspout to the rain barrel. So either this is your overflow or this is you actually draining and watering your rain barrel. It's moving down a swale, and then it hits this bermed area, which actually serves as a rain garden. So you can see that sort of has all the different features together. And I will say that this photo here is a rain garden that was recently planted. So you can see all the spaces in between, and it doesn't look very full. But once a rain garden fills in, ideally it just looks like any other landscaped area, and you don't necessarily notice that there's a big depression. And then I like this quote. I don't know if Benjamin Franklin actually said it, but I think it's pretty accurate. When the well is dry, we know the worth of water. So really paying attention to all of this stuff and doing what we can to help conserve water is an important thing. So we're glad that you all joined us on this rain barrel installation and use webinar, and now we can try to field some questions. So give us just a second. So somebody asked about a reference to gray water harvesting. I don't have any good ones on the top of my head, but CSU is about to publish fact sheets, 2 different fact sheets that cover all of that. So you can sort of stay tuned. You can keep checking back to the CSU Extension website and go to the publications. Hopefully that'll be out soon. We're making our way through the questions here, just a second. We have a rain barrel that is cracked.
For the most part on the rain barrels, when you have damage from cracking, I'm assuming maybe it had froze or some obvious damage to it. You're going to be best to replace the entire barrel. The decorative barrels are pretty pricey, so you might look at having getting some of the solvent-based adhesives to repair it, but I don't have a good answer because that would be a case-by-case basis.
And then the question about protecting against mosquitoes in rain gardens. So I'm glad you brought that up. You want to sort of do an infiltration test on in your yard, and so if you dig, you know, a little ways down, maybe 6 to 12 inches down, just as a testing spot, fill that with water. If that water stands for longer than 24 hours, then that means you don't have good infiltration, and that would not be a good spot for a rain barrel, for a rain garden. If it does drain, then
after a big rain and you have a rain garden in place, the water will go in there, but it's going to infiltrate in. So you're not really creating a pond where there's going to be standing water where mosquitoes can breed.
So it looks like there's a question about wells and septic systems. I'm not sure what your concerns would be other than that you place the rain barrel appropriately to the house and that you have drainage that's going away from your leach field. But beyond that, there shouldn't be any effect on that. And then Sheila and Trent are asking about where to purchase a good rain barrel extension. We can't really provide you a single source vendor. But what we can tell you is if you're going to make your own rain barrel or a do-it-yourself type situation, make sure that you're using a food grade unit and make sure it's really clean. Beyond that, make sure you are following the law, that it's a sealed top, that it's got screening, so you've got all those preventions and those sort of things that were covered by Deryn today. And yes, a rain barrel can only be on a house or a multi-unit home of the 4 or less units. Can't put it on the barn, a shed, a workshop, any of that. It needs to be on the home.
And the question about wanting to use rainwater inside a greenhouse, I have to stop you there before I even read the rest of the question. The water has to be used outside. You're not allowed to use the water inside the home, inside a greenhouse, inside anywhere. So it really has to be limited to outside landscape use. But we cautioned against plants for human consumption. So if you're putting the water on a vegetable garden, that's generally fine. You don't want to put it necessarily on leafy green, on lettuces and that sort of thing. You can always have the water tested. And I would say if you have some concern about that, that might be your best bet, because then you know what kind of water you're getting. But generally speaking, watering like fruiting, vegetables, and that sort of thing is going to be okay. But you'll always want to wash your produce very thoroughly, no matter what. And again, can't use the water inside a greenhouse.
So Jesse asked about the rain barrel police. Well, there aren't any, but you have to realize that rain barrels fall underneath the water commissioner and they do fall under Colorado water law. So, you know, you gotta be the good guy here. And if you're misusing your rain barrel, you have too many of them. If it can be proven that rain barrels are affecting downstream flows and are affecting a water right holder, this law can go away. They can stop the use of the rain barrels if any damage is proven. So I hope you don't want to be the bad guy that causes us all to lose this great resource.
And I see a question about where will this recorded webinar be posted. I'll just type in the address here. Basically, if you Google Colorado State University small acreages, it'll come up with the site. And while she's typing that in, there was a question about other states and their water laws.
So Colorado has very unique water laws. Some of the western states have similar water laws, but being a headwater state, ours are drastically different than, say, California, who is an arid western state. So this webinar is definitely directed to Colorado consumers and based on Colorado law. You're going to have to definitely look into your individual states if you're not in Colorado.
So we got one more question on the gray water collection system. There are definitely rules and regulations for gray water use. As I mentioned, CSU is about to publish fact sheets and good information on gray water use. You can also try checking out the CSU Stormwater Center. Those folks are working on a lot of these different types of water use, and I think they have some good information on gray water use. So if you were to just Google Colorado State University Stormwater Center.
And just kind of a wrap up on Colorado water law, you know, I really encourage you guys to look a little bit into it. It's a tremendous historical document that's got a lot of cool things and a lot of great information on it. It's very complex, and realize that while it may seem silly to those that don't understand it, it's there for a reason. If we didn't have such strict water law and regulations, we wouldn't have the water that we have to have the nice things we have here in Colorado, and other states would be devastated by the lack of water flowing from our beautiful mountains.